Hello, my name is Simon Double and welcome to Inside the Rails, a monthly podcast for horse racing enthusiasts everywhere. And as ever, I'm joined by Phil Boyle from BG Racing, freshly returned from a holiday. How are you, Phil?
Hi Simon. Yeah, just returned from 2 weeks off. So despite the early morning recording session and the fact that I only arrived home yesterday evening, I'm still feeling pretty refreshed and invigorated. So I'm not sure whether that's going to be a good thing for recording the podcast or not, but we'll see.
Well, you've had 2 weeks off, you lucky man, and I believe you took in some golf while you were away. Was that playing or watching?
Both, actually. I was at the PGA Championship at Wentworth in the days before we went away. And then I managed to play several times while we were away. My wife plays as well, so thankfully, playing on holiday is allowed. It doesn't get me into any trouble.
Excellent, excellent. Now, we should really start by discussing the passing of the Queen. I think, like a lot of people, the news hit me more than I realised it might do. I guess it reaffirms a sense of one's own mortality, but also, I guess, reignites those feelings of grief one's endured in the past.
Yeah, I think you're right on that one. And although we would both be considered pretty old by many people's standards, the death of a reigning monarch hasn't happened in our lifetime, so it's a new one for us as well. Obviously, the impact is wide-reaching on all sorts of areas, but if I was to focus on the one we know most about, which is horse racing, obviously, there were so many people in our industry that had come into contact with our monarch through horse racing. The Queen was, of course, an owner and breeder of horses, and it remains to be seen whether anyone else in the royal family will take a similar interest in our sport in the future. I know racing's often called the sport of kings, and to some extent that's a stereotype that we're always looking to break down a little bit, because we feel that through shared ownership in syndicates and racing clubs, racing shouldn't just be the sport of kings, it should be the sport for everybody. But royal support for the sport is something that definitely gives us some credibility and some status, and that shouldn't be underestimated. You've only got to look at some of our race names, haven't you, to see how tied we are to the monarchy. We all head to Kempton for the King George on Boxing Day. Summer highlight is the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Stakes at Ascot. We've got the Queen Mother Champion Chase at Cheltenham. We have the Queen Elizabeth II Stakes on Champions Day at Ascot later this month. So there's loads and loads of other examples as well. So hopefully the enthusiasm for our sport from the royal family will carry on in the future.
Absolutely, Phil. And there is little doubt the Queen's passing will leave a huge void in horse racing. But the good news is it would appear that Camilla, the Queen Consort, is going to take over the late Queen's racing interests. In fact, I believe she left the horses to her in her will.
If that happens, that'll be great. So, we'll watch on with interest on that one. Now, changing the subject somewhat, after a relatively quiet time on the track, I think Solario Racing's been busy up and down the country. I know that being named Simon Double might imply that you can be in two places at once, but I did see recently you had the challenge of two runners on the same day at different racecourses.
I did indeed. Sharp Distinction ran at Sandown, and 20 minutes later Tarantino ran at Yarmouth. So clearly I couldn't be in both places. As Sharp Distinction hadn't run for over 100 days and he had many more owners going to see him, I went to Sandown. Only two owners were going to Yarmouth for Tarantino, and in fact one of them was in both horses anyway. So they were both happy to buy their own drinks at Yarmouth, and I told them to send me the receipt.
Okay. That explains a lot, although I think you might have missed the opportunity to invest in a Solario Racing helicopter or private jet there. But I believe both the horses did run well.
They did indeed, yeah. Sharp Distinction, I said he'd been off the track for a long while. At last he had his ground. It was soft going, which we were pretty sure he needed. And he ran a fine race to be fourth, beaten just 4 lengths. Very pleasing reappearance with Stefano Cerci in the saddle. Meanwhile, or a little bit later, Kieran Fallon rode Tarantino, who bounced back to form, and he was second, beaten just a length in a very tight 5-runner nursery. And if people want to know what a nursery is, it's a handicap for 2-year-olds. So, happy owners, a happy trainer, and a very, very happy racing manager.
Good to hear. And what about Dancing in the Woods? Did I see he'd also been back racing?
Yes, he ran at Haydock at the weekend, his first run since a minor wind operation, and we ran him in first-time blinkers to sharpen him up. Now with him, unlike Sharp Distinction, we always knew really that good to soft ground wouldn't be ideal. He ran on it once and didn't really perform. but it's that time of year we're going to struggle to get the right ground, so we took a punt on running him as he was working really nicely at home. He ran okay, he was sixth, beaten just 4 lengths, and in fact, Phil, if he hadn't been bumped and checked for room, he would have been in the first 4, I'm sure, so a pleasing run. But what about you, Phil, and the BG Racing horses? I know you've been away on holiday, but you're celebrating a winner for the 2nd month running.
Yes, yeah, I don't want to do the old buses cliche, but after 18 months since the last winner, we ended up having 2 in 2 weeks. So yeah, they certainly came along in quick succession. Listeners will probably remember that in our September episode, we had to record it in instalments because I was off to Worcester to see if Dynamic Kate could follow up her Fontwell win with another one there. She actually very nearly did so. She jumped the last still on the bridle, and we were pretty confident she was going to win the race, but something came down the outside, finishing really well, and she just got outspeeded on the run-in, finishing second, but well clear of the rest. So that was a great run, and we did plan to give her a break after that, but Neil Mulholland, our trainer, wanted to have a look at Fontwell a few days later because it was the same course and distance that she'd won over, and he thought it might turn into a reasonable opportunity, and it actually transpired that it did. When we looked at the final entries and declarations, it looked like a good opportunity for her. So she was declared to run there. We decided to all head back to Fontwell, and I'm delighted to say she came home in front again. So 2 wins and a 2nd place in a couple of weeks. So it's fair to say that was a very happy bunch of shareholders. And I know I've said it before, but part of the thrill of syndicate management for me is just seeing the delight of people that own even a very small share when their horse wins. It really becomes their horse. They go into work the next day, or they meet up with friends, and they tell them all about their horse winning, and they get to have that feeling for a fraction of the cost of owning a horse outright.
Well, I totally agree, Phil. And, of course, not only when they win. The owners were absolutely thrilled with Sharp Distinction and Tarantino when they were placed. Now, what news of Far Too Beautiful, your other horse?
Yeah, well, no runs for her this month, as we're still waiting for some soft ground, but hopefully that's around the corner. And we've got some plans for October in terms of flat races that she could possibly go for. But she's also been learning to jump, and she seems to have taken to that very well so far. She had a session over some cross-country eventing style obstacles last week, just a mini cross-country course. That all went very well. Better than I expected, really. She seems to have taken to it very well. I'm heading off up to Epsom Downs, as it happens, just after we finish recording. Jump jockey Jamie Moore has kindly offered to come down to school her over some hurdles. So, yeah, fingers crossed we should be able to run her over hurdles this winter as well as on the flat in the next few weeks.
Well, I don't think you'll have any problems finding soft ground now, and that's really nice to have a dual prospect horse over the winter. Now, I guess we should have a look back over the last month's racing, shouldn't we?
Yep, let's do that. And I suspect in that regard, I'm probably chatting to a very happy Simon. I do remember that last month you said that Summergand was probably one of your favourite horses outside of those that were owned by Solario Racing. So, yeah, you must have been over the moon when he won the Ayr Gold Cup.
Yes, definitely. He never seems to run a bad race, Summergand, and jockey Danny Tudhope gets on really well with him, having been in the saddle for 8 of his 15 wins. And also, he won a nice double-figure price. You were on holiday, weren't you, Phil, in the area when the Ayr Gold Cup was run?
Yeah, in what was, as a racing fan, was probably very poor planning, but I would hasten to add, as a husband with a very tolerant wife, was probably excellent planning. I was indeed in Ayr, but not until the week after the big September race meeting. So, yeah, much as I would have loved to have visited, I didn't get the opportunity, and I'm not sure that Mrs. Boyle would have been quite so thrilled with racing trips interrupting our holiday.
Discretion, the better part of valour, Mr. B. Well done you. Now, 4 horses that I'd like to give a mention to. Firstly, Nostrum, trained by Sir Michael Stout, a 2-year-old son of Kingman who made it 2 out of 2, winning the Group 3 Tattersall Stakes at Newmarket over 7 furlongs. There were only 4 runners, but they included 2 horses with a rating of 104 and 109, the latter being the Royal Ascot Chesham Stakes winner Holloway Boy. Well, Nostrum could be anything, as they say, and in fact he's now 8-1 joint third favourite for next year's 2,000 guineas. Can't believe we're talking about next year's guineas already. Anyway, I did avail myself of a little bit of 12-1, but a few months to go there yet. And talking of next year's Guineas, a horse very prominent in the 1,000 Guineas, that's for the fillies, and also the Oaks, which is the equivalent of the Derby for fillies. That's a horse called Commissioning, trained by John and Thady Gosden, also by Kingman, and who also kept up her unbeaten run after 2 starts when absolutely bolting up in the Group 2 Rockville Stakes. She's also 8-1 second favourite for next year's 1,000 Guineas and 10-1 for the Oaks. Listeners may remember I picked out a Willie Haggis horse called Maljoom earlier this season. Well, there's another Haggis horse for you to follow, listeners, and he's called Garden Route, a well-bred son of Galileo who ran a very eye-catching race to be third in a decent Newmarket maiden over a mile recently. He's out of a Group 1 winning South African dam, so I guess Garden Route is quite an appropriate name. and finally, Phil, a winner at Foss Lass I'd like to mention. I never thought I'd be mentioning Foss Lass and a horse I'd like to mention in the same breath, but there you go. A 2-year-old son of Frankel called Arrest won his second race there very recently, defying a penalty and absolutely hosing up by 5.5 lengths. He's been nibbled at for the Derby, but he's still 40-1, also trained by the Gosdens. Your highlights, Phil?
Well, I shall be adding those to my notebook so we can make sure that we mention any successes that they have in the future on future podcasts. But to be honest, I haven't got a similar list. I haven't seen much racing this month. Obviously, being away, whilst I've still looked at the racing every day and checked the results, I haven't watched as much as usual. So not been able to see. I've seen who's won, but not necessarily how well they won whilst I was on holiday. I was limited to very early in the morning or very late at night for my racing intake. That wasn't really conducive to watching much of the action live, or indeed recordings. I didn't want to be waking my wife up with me getting excited at watching a race recording on the laptop. But yeah, the hot off the press news, I guess, that we ought to talk about is the retirement of the staying super horse Stradivarius. That was only announced yesterday, the day before we're recording. I thought it was very sporting of his owner to keep him in training for as long as he did, and that longevity definitely added to his attraction and helped him to generate a big public following. So there's obviously a lot of news about his retirement. He had lost his previous air of invincibility in recent times, so I think his retirement was not unexpected, but you know, it was still significant.
A wonderful horse indeed. 20 wins in 35 starts, 7 at the highest level, in other words, Group 1 level, only out of the first 4 on 3 occasions. I actually remember doing some hospitality at Royal Ascot in 2017 with jockey Hayley Turner, and I tipped Stradivarius to win the Queen's Vase, which was the first of 4 successive Royal Ascot wins the horse had, 3 of which were, of course, the Ascot Gold Cup. Yes, a wonderful horse. Hope he enjoys his time at stud.
Indeed, indeed. Now, being on holiday also meant that I missed the National Racehorse Week. That's where a lot of trainers and studs open their gates to the general public and give everybody a chance to see behind the scenes. It meant I was away when my 2 trainers, Michael Atwater at Epsom and Neil Mulholland in Bath, both had their open days, but the reports are that both went very well. And I do know that you had some first-hand experience of a yard open day, as I saw a picture of you manning a Solario racing table. So how was the experience for you?
Yes, Amy very kindly let me have a stand in her main courtyard, and in fact we made it a joint Amy Murphy Racing Solario Racing stand. I was very happy to promote Amy's Racing Club. It's at a different price point entry level to Solario Racing, so we're not really competing against each other. Amy and her staff, as ever, pushed the boat out for the many visitors who visited Southgate Stables. There was a homemade cake stall raising money for charity, and identify the horses competition. And one of the highlights for me, and indeed the many people who went, was a tack demonstration. So Amy showed people how to tack up a horse and talked about the extra accoutrements such as hoods and blinkers and visors that you can put on horses. The yard won the best Newmarket stable at the open day for the last 2 years, so I think, to be fair, it was always going to struggle to win it 3 times running. But it was given a commended by the judges and £200 for the staff.
That sounds great, and good to hear that in future, if there's any problems with the trainer getting to the track, you'll be able to tack up the Solario racing runners yourself, no doubt.
Yeah, I'll think about that one. I have actually helped in the past. So yeah.
But yeah, these yard open days do seem to be well supported, don't they? I know you and I are always keen to promote shared ownership, even to the extent that we set this podcast up, of course. But I do wonder whether, on the whole, there's enough done to highlight how accessible ownership can be. I mean, people seem so keen to come and see the horses in the stables or on the gallops, and I do wonder whether